Good morning, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership That Delivers Results AM Talk Show. I'm your host, Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, and as always, it is both an honor and a privilege to spend time with you. Whether you've been with us at our very first episode, or if you're joining our conversation for the very first time, welcome. Over the past 50 episodes, we've had meaningful conversations about leadership, education, economic mobility, workforce development, democracy, civic engagement, and the importance of building stronger communities. As I reflected on those conversations, one thing became very clear to me. The work isn't finished. In many ways, it is just beginning. That's why I'm so excited to welcome you to season 2. The season is going to be deeper, not simply talking about leadership, but exploring the kind of leadership that produces measurable results. Not simply identifying problems, but examining practical solutions. Not simply discussing poverty, but understanding how leadership can create opportunities that disrupt poverty for individuals, families, and entire communities. In each episode, 5 days a week, we'll continue connecting our conversations to Agenda 2030 in action. Because sustainable development doesn't just begin in conference rooms around the world, it begins in neighborhoods, schools, businesses, faith communities, nonprofit organizations, and with leaders who are willing to serve. So let me begin this conversation with a question I found myself asking throughout much of my career. What truly changes a community? Is it funding? Is it policy? Is it programs? Or is it leadership? Let's explore that together. Each episode during season 2, I'll leave you with a leadership quote to carry with you long after our conversation ends. And before we begin, I'd like to leave you with today's leadership quote. Good intentions may start the conversation, but leadership that delivers results changes lives. I hope you'll hold on to that thought throughout today's conversation. Because if we're honest, most people have good intentions. Most organizations have good intentions. Most leaders begin with good intentions. But communities are not transformed by intentions alone. Communities are transformed when leaders are willing to move from intention to implementation, from conversation to collaboration, and from activity to measurable results. In addition to our leadership quote daily, I'm infusing here in lesson good grief. Um Episode 2, season 2. I cannot talk this morning. It's too early, y'all. Um a leadership principle. And today's leadership principle is this: communities are transformed when leaders choose collaboration over competition and measurable results over good intentions. And as simple as that principle sounds, I believe it challenges every one of us to think differently about leadership. And let's explore why that's the case. One of the things I've learned over the years is that leadership has a way of revealing itself during difficult times. It is easy to lead when everything is going well. It is easy to lead. It is easy to celebrate success after the work has already been done. But real leadership often shows itself when communities face challenges that seem too big for any one person or organizations to solve. And let's be true. If you open up your eyes, walk out your door, look up the street, down the street, behind you or in front of you, you're going to see that each and every day in different forms, in different methods, in different ways. I've attended community meetings where everyone agreed something needed to be changed. Man, it's happening every day of the hour on hour. I've listened to educators who wanted to become better outcomes for their students. I've spoken with nonprofit leaders who are committed to serving families. I've met business owners eager to invest in their communities. I've worked alongside public servants who genuinely wanted to make a difference. And despite all of that passion, one question continued to stay with me. Why do some communities move forward while others remain stuck? Perhaps the better question is this: what happens when good people work hard but not together? Because leadership isn't simply about bringing people to the table. You can bring people to the table simply by inviting them to eat. Leadership is about helping people see a shared purpose once they arrive. And when leaders begin building partnerships instead of silos, communities begin changing. That's what today's conversation is really about. Bringing people to the table to see shared opportunities versus continuing to work in silos. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to observe two communities that were remarkably similar. And again, we have a lot of communities in today's districts, near, far, and global, that are remarkably similar. Both communities had dedicated educators. Both had families working hard every day. Both had churches actively serving their neighborhoods. Both had nonprofit organizations committed to helping people. Both had businesses trying to create jobs. And both wanted better opportunities for the next generations. Yet, several years later, their outcomes look very different. Sounds familiar? One community experienced stronger collaboration between schools and employers. Local organizations began sharing resources instead of competing for them. Collaboration versus competition. Community leaders met regularly, not to protect their own interests, but to solve shared challenges. Yes, this is a 6 a.m. show, so if you didn't expect yarning, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Students gain internships opportunities. Businesses found skilled workers. We off to a great start. Residents became more engaged and hope became visible. Sounds familiar? It should, because this is an example of communities that either you work around or you currently live in or nearby. Now, the other community, on the other hand, continued working just as hard. But instead of working collaboratively, everyone worked separately. Programs existed, meetings continued, resources were available, yet collaboration remained limited. And when I reflect on these two communities, I realized that something had stayed with me ever since. The difference wasn't making one community care more than the other. The difference wasn't making one wasn't that one community had unlimited resources. The difference was leadership. Leadership that built trust, leadership that invited collaboration, leadership that remained focused on outcomes instead of ownership. And that's one lesson every one of us can apply. Listen, whether we're leading a family, a classroom, a business, a nonprofit, a congregation, or shoot, an entire community, leadership is about creating the conditions where people can succeed together. Now, where we hear the word poverty, many people immediately think income. They also immediately think Black. But poverty is more than about economics and cultural identification. Poverty could mean limited educational opportunities, limited access to healthcare, limited transportation, limited workforce opportunities, limited social capital, limited hope. And that's why disrupting poverty requires more than financial assistance. It requires leadership. Leadership that expands opportunity. Leadership that removes barriers. Leadership that creates partnerships. Leadership that understands that sustainable change happens when communities work together instead of working apart. And that is exactly why this conversation matters. Because every one of us has an opportunity to influence someone else's future. The question isn't whether we're capable of leading. The question is, what kind of leadership will we choose to demonstrate? As we're preparing for today's conversation, I found myself thinking about something that I believe many of us have experienced. Have you ever left a meeting feeling inspired, only to realize a few weeks later that nothing had actually changed? Now, I'll admit that most conversations in a meeting, the conversations are good. The intentions were sincere. Everyone agreed that the issue was important. And yet, life continued exactly as it had before. Now, I don't say that as criticism because I used to be a part of those meetings. I used to be an active body going to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. But at one point, I stopped going to those meetings that were just all about conversation and more conversation and less action. And I say this because I've learned that good intentions are often where leadership begins, but they're never where leadership ends. Leadership has to move us somewhere, right? It has to create movement. Leadership has to create opportunity. It has to create results for people remaining willing to show up meeting after meeting, day after day, week after week, month after month. Otherwise, we're simply having good conversations. And our community deserve more than conversations. They deserve progress. Now, one of the reasons I believe leadership always should be informed by evidence is because data helps us move beyond assumptions. And because that's what evidence tells us. For example, study after study continues to demonstrate that education remains one of the strongest predictors of long-term economic mobility. And, in a recent interview with one of my season 2 guests, she talks about the importance of data-driven outcomes and quality-based evidence. And because lived experience is irrefutable, where numbers can be manipulated. So when we're thinking about qualitative data and studies that infuse qualitative data, it continued to demonstrate and become one of the strongest predictors of long-term economic mobility. Now, you might have data, but if you're not quite sure how to interpret that data, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods study, then please bring a person on your team that can help do just that. Communities with stronger educational outcomes often experience higher employment, increased earnings, improved health outcomes, and greater civic participation. At the same time, employers consistently identify communication, collaboration, critical thinking, adaptability, and problem solving amongst the most valuable workplace skills. When we stop and think about it, these aren't simply employment skills. They're leadership skills. Research also reminds us that communities making sustained progress rarely do so because of one exceptional organization. They succeed because organizations work together. Schools partner with employers, nonprofits partner with government, businesses invest in education, communities leaders align around shared priorities. The evidence is remarkably consistent. Communities become stronger when leadership becomes collaborative. And perhaps that's exactly where we should focus our attention. Not asking who should solve the problem, but asking how could we solve the problem together? Right? This brings me to today's Agenda 2030 goal. As many of you know, one of the unique aspects of this program is our commitment to connecting leadership with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through Agenda 2030 in action. I love that. Each episode this season, each week, will highlight each day of the week, because we are on 5 days a week, consistently at 6 a.m., we'll highlight one sustainable development goal, not simply to explain it, but to explore how it can live in our own communities. Today's focus is Sustainable Development Goal 17, Partnerships for the Goals. I think this is one of my most favorite because it talks about partnerships, and I'm a heavy component or believer in cross sector partnerships. I intentionally chose SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 17, to begin season 2 because I've come to believe that partnerships are one of the leadership are one of leadership's greatest responsibilities. Think about it. When we look at the challenges our communities face, none of them fit nearly inside of one organization. Let's think about it. Poverty doesn't, education doesn't, workforce development doesn't, economic mobility doesn't, health communities doesn't, and every meaningful challenge requires people who are willing to work together. That's what SDG 17 teaches us. Not simply to partner, but to partner with purpose, to build relationships rooted in trust, to align resources around shared outcomes, to understand what leadership isn't about who's receiving the credit. Leadership is about ensuring the work gets done. And when leaders build partnerships, communities build opportunity. That's 2030 in action. One of the things I appreciate most about leadership is that it always brings us back to people. Behind every statistic is a family. Behind every policy is a child. Behind every program is someone hoping for a better future. That's why I never want to so focus on systems that we forget the people those systems were created to serve. Listen, leadership is personal. Hell, poverty is personal. Education is personal. Community is personal. When leadership improves, people's lives improve. That's why this conversation matters. I decided to elevate my season 2 from season 1. Season 1 was the foundation. That was to see how it was going to go. That was going to test the waters. That was going to identify if, first of all, I could be consistent and to really stay on top of what I believe and what I enjoy doing. And guess what? 50 plus episodes later, I proved to myself I was right. But most importantly, to identify and have these conversations with you, the audience, dropping knowledge, share nuggets, and bringing on extraordinary guests, experts in their field, and through lived experience that can help keep the conversation of disrupting poverty through leadership that delivers results, and while focusing on Agenda 2030 in action. So this season, elevating it, I want to bring in, I'm introducing 5 pillars. And these pillars will be a standard part of season 2 daily moving forward. So as we reflect on today's conversation, I want to bring everything together through a framework that guides this program and reflects our mission on disrupting poverty through leadership that delivers results. These are more than just discussion topics, y'all. These are leadership principles that shape how we think, how we serve, and how we create measurable change in our communities. I call them the 5 pillars of leadership that delivers results. I know, I'm so intelligent, right? And as you listen to each pillar, I encourage you to reflect on your own leadership journey and consider how these principles are showing up in your work, they're showing up in your organization and how they are showing up in your community. Let's begin. The 5 pillars of leadership that delivers results. Pillar 1 is leadership that delivers results. You know, leadership is often associated with positions, authority, or influence. But over the years, I've come to believe that leadership is something much deeper. Leadership is about responsibility and accountability. It's about willing to step forward when others step back. It's about bringing people together around a shared purpose, even when the path isn't easy. And let's be honest, we're living in a cultural climate where the path forward is not easy. Most importantly, leadership is measured by outcomes, not intentions. Remember, intentions are good, but they're not going to move the needle the way they need to. Communities don't become stronger because someone held a title. Communities become stronger because someone else chose to listen, build trust, inspire action, and remain committed until meaningful change occurred. Leadership doesn't deliver results. The leadership that delivers results don't seek recognition. It creates opportunities. It doesn't focus on being remembered. It focuses on making a difference. As leaders, our greatest legacy won't be the positions we've held. It will be the lives we impacted. What measurable result is your leadership producing in the lives of others? Booyah. All right, let's move on to pillar 2, disrupting poverty. When many people hear the word poverty, they immediately think income, for sure, hands down. But poverty is much more complex than economics. Poverty often reflects barriers to opportunity, barriers to education, barriers to employment, barriers to healthcare, barriers to transportation, barriers to hope. That's why disrupting poverty requires more than temporary solutions. It requires leaders who are committed to expanding opportunity. Every scholarship awarded, every student mentored, every entrepreneur supported, every workforce pathway created, every barrier removed. Those actions create opportunities that can change generations. Disrupting poverty isn't about doing everything because you can't. It's about doing something that creates lasting opportunity for someone else and not by yourself, not in a silo. Wait, now let's be honest. You may start out creating this movement on your own, and that's where it should. Why? Because listen, if you don't realize why you're doing something, or you're only doing it because someone else is doing it, then when the efforts fall flat on your face, the momentum is going to stop. Let me use, for example, and I use this all the time because I used to be that person, and it happened, right? Right around the end of fourth quarter, November, right after the holidays, everybody is feeling the holiday game, right? And like clockwork. The gyms are filling up. Money is raining everywhere. People are literally losing their minds trying to get in a gym. The momentum is there. My girlfriend, we're doing the squat challenge. We're going to gym 5 days a week. We're going to be in the gym 6 o'clock in the morning. And on day one, the gyms are packed. And mostly people are there with a group of people. Hubby, girlfriend, homeboys, whatever. By day 5, the momentum has filtered. It fizzled out, I mean. And that same person who really did gain the holiday 30, really want to lose the summer 50, they're looking to their left and they're looking to their right and they're looking behind them and they're looking in front of them. And they're trying to figure out where the momentum went, why their muse left them, what's going to get them up and get them to the gym every day. And it really always should have been about them and not others. So the silo approach to a program will absolutely begin and end with the person that's starting the launch. But then it comes the time, like in that gym, picking up the holiday 30 and want to lose the summer 50, you're going to need help, right? You do the most important job every day, showing up. No, really, waking up, then showing up. And then you figure, I need help. Now, the help in the gym could come in the forms of a friend, an accountability partner, a nutritionist, somebody that's gonna, do weight training with you, or all of the above. That momentum and initiatives could be a nonprofit leader. It could be a funding source. It could be adding a person to your team. It could be having a scheduler to have those conversations. Listen, you started absolutely in a silo manner. But then as you transitions, you start building transactional and transformational relationships. Because disrupting poverty isn't about doing everything. It is about doing something that creates lasting opportunity for someone else, and you cannot do it alone. That's leadership. Now, let's reflect for a second. How are you creating opportunities that help others move beyond poverty towards possibility? $1 million reflection question. Now, let's move on to pillar 3, education and workforce development. Listen, education has always been one of the greatest investments we can make. No, it is outside of bearing children, right? Not simply because it prepares people for careers, but because it prepares people for life. The future workforce will demand more than technical knowledge in AI communication. It will require critical thinking. It will require communication. The workforce will require collaboration. It will require adaptability. It will require integrity. And most importantly, it will require leadership. Our responsibility isn't simply to prepare students for their first job. My dad said something to me that really relates to this recent line. When I bought my first home, my first townhome, right? He said, it isn't getting the home that's the biggest celebration. It's maintaining and keeping the home so that you don't get kicked out. In other words, it's the same thing in our responsibility in preparing our youth and young adults for the workforce. It isn't about just helping them to prepare for their first job, because they can get a job anywhere. But it is about helping them to get the job, maintain the job, and be promoted on the job and turn it into a career. It is to prepare them to solve problems, lead with character, embrace lifelong learning, and contribute meaningfully to their communities. That is our responsibility. When we invest in education, we're investing in tomorrow's leaders. And that's an investment every community can benefit from. Every community. Now, let's reflect for a second. What are you doing today to help prepare the next generation of leaders? Drop your answers below because I want to know what you're doing, right? Because we're all doing things differently, but we're all amazing because we get up every day to make a difference. So let me know what you're doing. Pillar 4, community impact. Leadership should never exist in isolation. Case in point, its purpose is to strengthen the communities we serve, want to serve, preparing to serve, dreaming about serving, or actually serving. Community impact isn't measured by how many initiatives we launch. We're going to launch initiatives every hour on a day. That's 24 initiatives. And then they sit. And then when we start to implement one, the other 20 sit on the sideline because 1 through 5 is overwhelming. It is measured by whether people experience meaningful improvement in their lives. And that is the caveat. Programs are not about numbers. It's about impact. The people in your program, are their lives better? Are the families stronger? Are neighborhoods safer? Are businesses growing? Are students succeeding? Are partnerships expanding? Real leadership produces measurable impact. And guess what? If you're not quite sure how to measure it, bring a person on your team that can help in a volunteer standpoint. Reach out and start a collaboration or partnership that can help you make sense of what measurable impact looks like. When communities are stronger, because we choose to lead, we fulfilled one of our highest responsibilities. And we cannot take that lightly. Our goal should never be to make an impression. Our goal should be to make a difference. Now, that's easier said than done because leading in today's environment, when we're dealing with the negative nannies, the troublesome Karens, the good old girl network, the mean girls, the bullions, the good old boy network, all of those things we have to come up against. But if your goal is not to simply make an impression, but to really make a difference, then we learn to navigate and weave through all of those people, shut them out, and really get to the reason why we wake up daily, to make a difference. Leadership reflection. How is your leadership making your community stronger today than it was yesterday? Let me know below. I would love to hear how things are going in your neck of the woods. And pillar 5, Agenda 2030 in action. One of the reasons I continue highlighting Agenda 2030 in action is because it reminds us that leadership extends beyond individual organizations and individual communities. Again, individual, silo, that's not what we want. The Sustainable Development Goals challenge us to think bigger, macro, not micro, to collaborate more intentionally, to recognize that many of our greatest challenges are shared. And therefore, many of our greatest solutions must also be shared. The greatest part of being a podcaster and an advocate through social media, hosting my shows, and everything else I do is the ability to have the conversation with others, right? And I love having conversations because I'm an old soul by heart. I love hearing from people. I love the wisdom. I love being around to absorb what people are doing. And I'm in awe and enamored by the great work that people are doing. But the other part that I love about conversations is not just having conversations and interviewing others, but really teaching them. And my guests last season and this season, I love teaching them about the structured framework of Agenda 2030. Believe it or not, most people are already doing or addressing the SDGs that make up Agenda 2030. They just don't know that there's a framework around what they're doing, right? So I love being able to share that information with them, teach them, and learn from them, right? And that's what collaboration is. It's more intentional, right? When you're having a conversation with a person, a reason, season, or a lifetime, it shouldn't just be all about you. What's in it for me? It should be an intentional dialogue, right? An intentional teach and learn and where we go from here. And it may not lead anywhere, but you're learning something new. And, before I move on, what I often hear people say is that I thought when we go through crises in our personal lives, we think we got it bad, right? Until we hear someone else's story. And then it makes us want to shut up because we realize we don't have it as bad as the next person. That conversation could stop a person from jumping off a cliff or committing suicide or going through with suicide or wanting to step into the bus. It allows us conversations and relationships, collaborations help us to put things into perspective intentionally. Intentional collaborations helps us to recognize one of our greatest challenges are shared. And therefore, many of our greatest solutions must also be shared. Today's conversation focused around SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal 17, partnerships for the goals. Partnerships remind us that lasting progress happens when leaders bring people together around a common purpose. Agenda 2030 isn't simply a global framework. For me, it's a leadership framework. It challenges us how our work contributes to stronger communities, greater opportunities, and a greater sustainable future. That's why every episode of this season, 5 days a week, every week, will highlight one SDG, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical blueprint for leadership in action. Because global goals become more meaningful when local leaders choose to act. Now, here's a leadership reflection for Agenda 2030 in action. What action can you take this week to turn today's Agenda 2030 goal, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, into meaningful impact within your community? One of the things I've learned through my leadership journey is that leadership principles become powerful when they're put into action. That's why I want to introduce another feature for season 2 called Leadership in Practice. Every day of each week, we'll take a few minutes to highlight a leader, an organization, initiative, or community that demonstrates what leadership that deliver results look like in action. Because leadership isn't simply something that we study. It's something we practice. Today's conversation focused on Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 17, partnerships for the goal, partnership for the goals. So let's consider what that looks like in practice. Across communities, we're seeing encouraging examples of school systems partnering with local businesses to expand internships and career pathways for students. We're seeing nonprofit organizations working alongside healthcare providers to address barriers that affect children and families. We're seeing colleges, workforce development organizations, employers, and community leaders aligning their efforts to prepare individuals for meaningful careers instead of isolated jobs. None of these successes happened because one organization had every answer. They happen because leaders recognize that sustainable change requires shared responsibility. That's the lesson I hope we all take away today. Leadership isn't about doing everything ourselves. It is about creating the conditions where everyone can contribute their strengths towards a common purpose. So before we move on, I want to leave you with one final reflection. Who could you partner with today that would strengthen your ability to create meaningful change tomorrow? Because leadership that delivers results isn't built alone. It's built through leadership. It's built through collaboration and a shared commitment to improving the lives of others. That's leadership in practice. As we begin to bring today's conversation to a close, I'd like to introduce another new feature for season 2 called the results framework. I know you're like, all these new, right? Because if you watch the first 50 episodes of season 1, you were getting used to a rhythm, right? You were getting used to a pattern. But if I continue that for season 2, you wouldn't tune in. So listen, we got to keep it spicy, right? We got to keep elevating so that you're not only getting the knowledge and you're getting the insight and you're getting the aha, I didn't know that, but it's giving you practical insight, solutions, and things to think about to make you a better person, a leader, and civic engagement individual that's going to turn your community around. So another new segment is called the results framework. One of the things that I've learned throughout my career is that leadership should always create a space for reflection. And reflection, whether it is verbal, whether it's written, whether it's auditory, whether it's a combination, is the greatest thing that we have for ourselves to really pause, understand what worked, what didn't work, and how we navigate. Reflection allows us to pause, evaluate, and ask ourselves whether our efforts are producing the outcomes we intended. And I'll be the first to tell you, after I reflected on something I've done or how I have handled something, I probably could have done things differently. And sometimes I probably would have done the things the same, because if not, I probably wouldn't have gained the wisdom that I did at the end. So let's reflect on today's conversation together. Let's briefly reflect on today's conversation through our results framework. See how this has all come together? Listen, we've explored the difference between good intentions and leadership that delivers measurable results. We've acknowledged that our communities are filled with caring people, dedicated organizations, and individuals who genuinely want to make a difference. Yet, caring alone is not enough. Communities move forward when leadership brings together people around a shared vision, shared responsibility, and shared accountability. What leadership principle emerged? Leadership is about creating the conditions for others to succeed. It's about building trust before asking for commitment. It's about choosing collaboration over competition. And it's about understanding that the greatest accomplishments are rarely achieved by one person alone. How does this help disrupt poverty? Poverty is disrupted when opportunities are expanded, when education improves, when businesses invest in people, when communities strengthen partnerships, when leaders intentionally remove barriers instead of unintentionally creating them. Listen, disrupting poverty is not one initiative. It is the result of many people working together towards one common purpose. And how does this support Agenda's 2030 goal? Today's focus has been Sustainable Development Goal 17, partnerships for the goals. Every meaningful partnership strengthens our ability to solve complex problems. When leaders collaborate, resources are used more effectively, innovation increases, and communities become more resilient. That's what SDG 17 calls us to do. Build partnerships that creates lasting impact. What result should we pursue? Not simply more meetings, not simply more programs, but stronger partnerships, greater opportunities, improved educational outcomes, expanded workforce pathways, healthier communities, and measurable progress that people can see and experience. Every meaningful conversation should end with a practical action. That's why each day, each episode, weekly, I'll leave you with what I call the leadership blueprint. I hope you'll carry these 5 ideas with you throughout the week. Lead, but lead with purpose. Don't ask, how can I be recognized? Better yet, ask, how can I make a meaningful difference? Purpose-centered leadership has the power to influence people long after titles have changed. Learn. Remain a student. Every experience has something to teach us. Every conversation has a new perspective. You know, the best leaders never stop learning because they understand that growth is a lifelong journey. So first, lead. Second, learn. The third is partner. Think about a person, one organization, or one community partner you've never worked with before. Reach out, start a conversation, or start the conversation. And some of the most transformative partnerships begin with a simple introduction and a willingness to listen. Now, you did notice I say listen, right? Not get up there and give your elevator speech for 2 hours. What's in it for me? Listen. Because when you're actively listening, It helps you to understand the things of commonality and differences you have with others. But the fact that you can find a common ground starts where the relationship builds. So, first lead, then learn, then partner, and then act. Choose one action this week that creates opportunity for someone else. What do you mean, Dr. Dorsey? Great question. Mentor someone, make an introduction, volunteer your experience, support a small business, encourage a young person. Leadership becomes meaningful when it moves beyond intention into action. So we lead, we learn, we partner, we act, and now measure. At the end of this week, ask yourself one important question. What changed because I chose to lead? Not what did I accomplish, but whose life was better because I showed up? That is how leadership is measured. Before our next conversation, I like to leave you with a challenge. Now, this is a rollover from season 1. Because if you go back and listen to any and every one of the episodes, there's always a leadership challenge, which I absolutely love, at the end of each episode. So take a moment to identify one challenge in your workplace, your organization, your school, your faith community, or your neighborhood that cannot be solved by one person alone. Now, if you're thinking about your workplace, if you're thinking about your organization, whether you own a company or you work within a company, your school, whether you work at a school or you have children in school, K-12, higher ed, or graduate level, your faith community, Episcopal, Christian, Baptist, doesn't matter, or your neighborhood that cannot be solved by one person. That is literally open up your door and then walking out the front, the back, the side, the deck, the porch. It doesn't matter. And then ask yourself, who needs to be a part of the solution? I love that because now that's bringing in your cross-sector partnerships and you're no longer operating in silo. Now, don't wait for someone else to build the partnership. Be the person who makes the first call. Schedule the first meeting, extend the first invitation. And, what I know through business and in life, as you may have experienced, it's not in the initial outreach. Trust me, that's the easy part. It is all in the follow-up, the consistency. It moving beyond the first request to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, right? Leadership often begins with the courageous decision to bring people together. And that decision can begin with you. I love that. As we conclude today's conversation, I find myself returning to the same question we asked at the beginning of the episode. What truly changes communities? After reflecting together today, I don't believe the answer is simply more funding or more programs or even more policies. Those things certainly do have value. But lasting transformation begins when leadership gives those resources purpose, direction, and accountability. Communities are strengthened when leaders choose to collaborate instead of compete. when they invest in relationships before expecting results, when they understand that every partnership has the potential to expand opportunity for someone else. That's why I remain hopeful, because every day I meet leaders who care deeply about their communities, educators who believe in every student, business leaders who are investing in future workforce, nonprofit organizations that serve with compassion, public servants committed to making government more responsive, faith leaders strengthening neighborhoods, residents who simply want to leave their communities better than they found them. Those are the kinds of partnerships that transforms communities. And that's why today's conversations matters, because leadership isn't about wanting or not isn't about waiting for change. Leadership is about becoming part of the change. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership That Delivers Results AM Talk Show. I am your host, Dr. Tekemia Dorsey. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you as we continue exploring what it means to lead with purpose, serve with integrity, and create measurable change in our communities. As we conclude today's conversation, I want to leave you with one final thought. Leadership isn't defined by title. It's defined by the lives we impact, the opportunities we create, and the results we deliver. Until next time, continue leading with purpose, continue serving with integrity, and together, let's keep disrupting poverty through leadership that delivers results. Have a blessed day. I'll see you in the next episode. And when the music is not working. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the show.